Hello and welcome to Coffee Time with Abcadeas. I'm your host, Abcadeas, and this is the show where you might just see me take a sip of this here coffee, but mainly I just rant about anything and everything that interests me. So, although I'm not sure exactly when this video will go up, I'm filming this on February 9th. I imagine it will be going up today. A bit of a non political video once again. I do have quite a few videos I'm kind of not planning per se, but collecting resources for and prepping for. But as I mentioned previously, I have a bit of an ongoing dispute with my landlord, and we're getting a repairman out today to deal with some things, and I won't really have time to film a more complex, a more in-depth video. So I figured I'd get out one of the videos I wanted to do. That's more of kind of a generic rant, particularly with technology. A video I can kind of just fire off a little more quickly than I could those other kind of videos. So today I kind of want to talk about the concept of brand loyalty. And I want to do that by kind of using myself as a case study in terms of the OnePlus brand, so the OnePlus phone brand. So, to give you a bit of background, I first found out about OnePlus while I was doing quote unquote professional cell phone repair in an actual shop, like not out of my home at the time. And I spent quite a bit of time on YouTube looking at different pieces of tech, everything that's coming out. I paid attention to the industry quite a bit. I still do pay attention to it, but not quite as much. But initially, OnePlus released this phone here, the OnePlus One. So the name of the company is OnePlus, and then they just number their phones. So it ends up being this kind of neat little naming scheme. Every phone is a OnePlus number, right? Like 1+1, 1+2, 3, 4, 5, so on. I think it's a cool naming scheme, but when these guys first hit the scene, what was really kind of attractive about their brand as a whole is they had positioned themselves as a flagship killer. So essentially a device that is going to circumvent the need to buy any other kind of flagship device. The OnePlus One, I can't remember the exact price of it, but for the specs it had at the time, it was a very, very decent price. And the OnePlus One, when it released, was actually initially an invite-only program. So you either had to get an invite directly from OnePlus, or somebody that owned a OnePlus, or someone that had already joined the OnePlus buyers list. I'm not exactly sure on the details. I never got one of those phones myself. But the couple notable features about their phone mainly came down to software and price. They used at the time CyanogenMod, which is not a community built, but an independent kind of skin version of Android, if you will. And there were a lot of great things about it. The simplicity, basically taking stock Android and making a couple rudimentary fixes and changes to make the user experience a bit better. And they actually carried that forward, at least as far as their OnePlus 3T, this is actually the first phone I owned from them. It was the Midnight Black Special Edition release that came out at the time. And while that phone kind of marked a point in OnePlus's history where they started to get a bit more expensive, it was still a really good value for what you were paying, and I still had no issue recommending people towards OnePlus. And over time, OnePlus kind of moved away from that flagship killer status and more so moved towards just a flagship alternative. In some cases, they were maybe $100, $200 cheaper than the highest end Samsung at the time, but it was hard to justify it as anything other than another flagship competitor. And that brings me to my current device, the OnePlus 7 Pro. Holding it upside down. The OnePlus 7 Pro. I purchased this back, I want to say, early 2020, late 2019. 2.5 years, 3 years later, it is still a great device. You can see, I'll bring up the spec sheet here as a reference for any of those who are interested, but for me, this marked the last time in OnePlus's history in their development of mobile devices. This is the last truly definitive phone that OnePlus did better than anybody else. A few things. One thing that is extremely rare that I haven't seen really before or since, other than on a ZTE device, is this guy right here. You see that little notch? That's actually my front camera. So when I actually have the device powered on, turn up the brightness here, like you can see in the photo as well, if I pull it back up, you can see the screen there, but there ends up being no little camera hole punch, right? There is no camera on the front face of the screen. And that also doubles kind of as a privacy feature that if I don't open up my front camera specifically, it is literally inside the device, behind the screen, so it can't see anything. Right. On top of that, two front-facing speakers. Their OnePlus Dash charging was pretty amazing for the time. Still is. Generally, I don't ever worry about charging my device. I just plug it in for a couple minutes at a time, get like 30-40%, good to go. But what kind of happened after this device was released is OnePlus pulled back on anything unique about their devices. So this was the only phone, and I believe the OnePlus 7T Pro, which was only released in Eastern markets, mainly in India. It was only this device and then that device there that had this pop-up camera. And moving forward, my girlfriend has a OnePlus 8, and they removed that camera. Eventually, OnePlus, who had started off as this kind of flagship killer, a bit more of an independent company, although they were still under the same umbrella. I believe it's HBK Electronics. I could be wrong there. But they were under the same umbrella as several other Chinese brands. And over time, the original founder of the company left, and they saw this merger with Oppo, which is another Chinese brand that they already kind of had connections to. A lot of OnePlus's design language and even particular designs showed up in Oppo phones. So you can see a lot of similarities. The engineering teams definitely work together in a pretty major way. But as a consequence of that merger, they ended up merging their operating systems. So at this point, OnePlus's operating system was called Oxygen OS. It had moved on from CyanogenMod and actually become an official release version of Android. And then the version of Android you could find on Oppo devices was called Color OS. So essentially, as they merged these features or merged these operating systems with very slightly different feature sets, they had to make some sacrifices, they had to change some things, and now it's gotten to the point where we're looking at the most recent OnePlus device, the OnePlus 11. And I'll link the video down below from MKBHD. He goes over the same sentiment, but given the price of this device, given the software issues it has due to ColorOS not being, in my opinion, as well thought out as Oxygen OS was, you're basically looking at a device that I couldn't recommend to anybody for any reason. It used to be the case of when I was in cell phone repair, people had bad experiences with Samsung or Google Pixel devices or Google Nexus devices, as they were previously called. I would always recommend OnePlus. It would be my go-to, like up until the kind of release of OnePlus 8, I would always push people towards OnePlus. And then the OnePlus 8 came out, OnePlus 8 Pro, quite a few things I didn't like. I kind of held off on recommending them for the longest period of time, and to this day, I don't have an Android phone recommendation that I'm confident in, other than go find a used one of these and maybe an extra battery for yourself and switch out the battery so it's good to go. I know me personally, I'm most likely never gonna upgrade this device, even if it gets to the point like I smash the screen, need to replace the battery. I have connections directly into China, and if it comes to that, I can order third-party knockoff parts from China to have this phone still function, and that is most likely what I will do. I personally, being in the tech repair field, I saw a lot of weird random issues with Google Pixels. Samsung, I really don't like their UI, their user interface, or any of their design language. It kind of seems like a cheap knockoff in a lot of ways. Like, it reminds me of the PlayStation 3 interface. Like, obviously, I can't remember what Samsung calls it now, but obviously their UI has come a long way since I last used a Samsung phone around the Note 3. But even using the operating system in a device like the S21 FE, which, if I recall, is the most recent Samsung phone I've repaired. Been out of cell phone repair for a little while, but even on that phone, that would have come out maybe 3 years ago now. The UI was still just ugly, unintuitive. I just didn't like it. And really, what I want to bring this all back to is the idea of brand loyalty. So, like I had mentioned in one of my previous videos, corporations have very specific motives, to not even on any kind of conspiratorial level or any kind of philosophical level. The core objective of any corporation is to sell a product as cheaply, make it as cheaply as possible, and sell it for the most amount of money possible. Basically, the goal of the corporation is to make as much money as possible. Some corporations may make the decision to perhaps have certain products, certain devices be loss leaders, like in the case of gaming consoles, where they actually end up selling them pretty close to cost. Keep in mind that cost figure is derived after they factor in things like research and development and all these less, how shall I say, like tentative, specific costs, like that they can attribute to material costs or labor costs. These are more kind of arbitrary, like we had a development team working on 10 different phones or 10 different devices, and they spent 25% of their time, so 25% of their labor, blah, 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 right? Like, that's more of an arbitrary figure, but even factoring all that in, game consoles do end up being pretty close to that because they have software to sell. They have games, and that's what a lot of console manufacturers will kind of rely on. Whereas with phones, generally, unless you're Apple or Google, there is no residual revenue for you to have. Like, perhaps if you have your own subscription service, which I know a couple of the Android manufacturers do, but other than that, there is really no way for an Android manufacturer to recuperate their costs down the line. So they essentially have to find this balance between the actual cost of the device, cost of labor, materials, and what they can sell it for. And as a result of that, even the company with the best intentions, like OnePlus, that started off in this market, like, we're going to give people an affordable device that has great specs, and everybody's going to be happy. It's going to be the new Android device. But the thing is, as you scale up your business, you scale up shipping, you scale up manufacturing, all these things cost money. Obviously, despite the fact it is a Chinese company, there is shares, I'm sure, of the company that do belong to the Communist Party of China. It is still a private entity that has private shareholders that need to make money. And there is nobody that can justify having a company survive, just break even every year. They have to make some kind of profit. So it's inevitable. Even with the Nothing phone that the founder of OnePlus, after he left OnePlus, he went on to make a new company. I believe he's made a couple others since, but particularly the project he's working on now is the Nothing phone, which is kind of taking that same place that he wanted OnePlus to take. But again, it's going to be inevitable that they're going to reach a point that they either have to raise their prices, lower the specs, take out what's unique about the device in order to keep up with the rest of the market. So I think it's very important to remember that no matter how much you may like a particular product or how good of an experience you have with a particular product, that doesn't mean the next version of that product or another product from the same brand is actually going to be as good. It could be 10 times worse. So every time, in my opinion, you're spending more than $100 in technology on, sorry, anytime you're spending more than $100 on technology, you should make a really good effort to at least look on YouTube for reviews for people that have actually used the device for a long period of time, even if it's only a couple weeks, to get kind of an idea of what the device is actually like, how it compares to previous versions, how it compares to other brands. Because, in my opinion, there's no brand that is universally good. Like, for example, I do tend to lean towards Asus computer hardware. So, in particular, I have a pre built Asus tower that I bought when I was working at Staples. When I went to go upgrade it, I opted for an Asus motherboard, and when I bought my laptop that I use to produce my videos now, I went with an Asus Zephyrus. And in every situation, every decision there, it wasn't because it was an Asus branded item. When I bought the pre-built desktop from Staples, it was a super great deal. When I bought the motherboard, it was because it was literally the cheapest motherboard with an AM4 socket. I'm pretty sure that's the socket for the first generation Ryzen, but that's what's in there. And then this laptop, I spent months and months and months doing research, and this was at the time the best bang for your buck Windows gaming machine you could buy. You could scale it up and go to, I believe it was a 2080 at the time. I only got the 2070. I may have the 2060 in here. I'm not entirely sure. It doesn't matter too much to me. It plays the games I want. It does the production work I want, so I'm not too concerned about the nitty gritty. But the point I'm making is the reason I own an Asus laptop and an Asus pre-built desktop that I then upgraded with an Asus motherboard isn't because I like Asus or I think Asus is a good brand or even because I've ever had any customer service experience with Asus at all. Because quite frankly, I haven't. I've only ever had experiences with their hardware. So with that being said, I am more inclined that, say, if I have two products of a similar cost, similar use case, similar functionality, I will most likely lean towards the Asus one, but I'm still not opposed to going with another brand if the price is right. And I think that's the general attitude to take, not just with electronics, but any kind of consumer good in general. I think we do ourselves a lot of disservice by having this sense of loyalty, this sense of patronage to a brand. Like, I understand humans, especially under capitalism, want to belong and they want to be associated with some kind of group, right? They want to feel like they are a part of something. And a lot of the times they want to feel like they're a part of something that's better than the other things. So that's why you get people that really know nothing about technology rant on about iPhones and how anybody that owns an Android is a poor person and blah blah blah, despite the fact that Apple is still using USB technology that is a decade old, despite the fact that they have not invented, but they helped bring to market a universal USB solution and forced all their Macintosh users over to it. USB-C, by the way, is what I'm talking about. Despite the fact that Apple introduced that a decade ago, they just won't put it in their phones. Apple users have to deal with extremely slow data transfer rates, and I'm sure for most Apple users, that was nonsense anyways. A slower data transfer rate means nothing to you. You don't even understand what that is. Not to patronize or to demean Apple users, but yeah, the issues, the things that Apple products can't do, Apple users aren't aware of because they didn't know that they could even do those things. They're used to just airdropping their 200 gig, 3 hour long video file instead of just transferring it over a USB cable. But you do see a lot of that kind of like blind brand loyalty. And even when Apple releases a product that is a bit subpar or it upsets industry standards and goes in a direction that is super anti-consumer, where they're charging way more than what they should be, none of that matters because they've cultivated that brand loyalty. And I think a lot of people are doing themselves a disservice just because they have that brand loyalty. So they're only going to buy an iPhone. They only ever will buy an iPhone. Maybe they bought an Android phone once and they bought like a $200 LG phone and they're like, oh no, see, Android sucks. But it's the other thing about Android too is you have a lot more choices, a lot more variety, so it can be a bit more difficult to actually get a device that does everything you need it to and will be stable over the long term. Again, why it's hard to recommend an Android brand, because a lot of the long term stability and how long the overall lifespan of an Android device is really dependent on how much support, how long the manufacturer is willing to support the device. Because once it stops getting security updates and bug fixes, your phone's going to start to degrade over time, and eventually we'll get to a point where it is unusable. But, anyways, those were mainly jumbled thoughts. Hopefully you followed along for most of it. Again, not really political content today, but I just needed to get a video out so I don't miss a day and then stop making videos entirely. So, like I said, I have quite a few videos that I'm prepping for. I have quite a few sources ready, talking to people that are being affected by the particular issues. I have quite a few things on the burners, per se, but I also have quite a few of these videos that are a bit easier for me to film, that I can just kind of sit down and rant. So when I need to, I may resort to these types of topics to just get a video out for the day. But yeah, I think I have wasted enough of your time for today. Again, thank you. I believe I'm at 54 subscribers, which is pretty amazing. I know that sounds like peanuts to most content creators, but it's absolutely amazing. Thank you to anybody that is consistently watching my videos or has watched any of my videos. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much to anybody that has given me any kind of feedback, whether that was in a comment or through a personal message. I really do genuinely appreciate it. It only helps me improve as a person, and it helps me improve my content. Again, if you have any topic, tech related, geopolitics related, anything you want me to speak on, take a look into, do some research, feel free, reach out, let me know, either in a comment or a personal message if you have me on any of the assorted social medias. But other than that, I think that is all for the day. Thank you so much for watching, and have a gooder.